They are places that are somehow accountable, not to the community that they're in, but to some kind of a central authority, or to some kind of an idea about what the professional standard is for performance in this particular kind of institution. So we've been asking the question, how is it that communities could in fact retake the institutions that are already geographically located there? And what would happen when local citizens begin in fact doing that? One of the settings that we've learned an awful lot from over the last couple of years has been a story that is a complicated story, but a rich one that's been unfolding in Chicago. And it's the story of the Chicago public schools, of all things, right? What's happened in the Chicago public schools, there are about 552 of them. It's a huge system. Over 400,000 kids, employs over 40,000 people, multi-billion-dollar system, one of the biggest of these, right? What has happened is that there was a consensus reached about 8 or 10 years ago that was sort of captured by then Secretary of Education Bennett, who kept coming to Chicago and telling us, you have the worst school system in the country. And everybody in Chicago would nod and say, that's right, we do. Teachers would nod, the school board would nod, the political leadership would nod, and certainly the parents and community folks would nod. What happened was, when we faced I think it was our 9th teacher's strike in 18 years, right? And the schools were closed for yet another 3 or 4 week period, throwing families and communities into chaos. We had a little revolution in Chicago. And the revolution, in fact, came about in such a way that local communities decided, you know, I don't think we could do any worse than the big system is doing. If we took our schools back into community, we could probably make them work. And so I want to introduce you now to one of the leaders in Chicago school reform who's helped shape that reform and been at the center of it. Let me introduce you to Ann Hallett, who's the head now of a group that's working on the relationship between schools and communities nationwide called the Cross-City Campaign for Urban School Reform. Ann, could you describe for us Chicago school reform?
Chicago school reform has had the effect of moving significant power to the local schools. There's a local school council that is parent majority, 6 parents, 2 community members, 2 teachers and the principal that have real power. For the major amount of power of any urban system in the country. The local school councils hire and fire the principal and put that person on a 4-year performance contract. And they have significant authority over budget and over local school improvement planning and implementation. One of the really important things of Chicago school reform is that it unleashed civic energy around schools and really we're about reclaiming a very important public institution back into community life. For example, there's a high school and its feeder schools here called the Orr High School Network. A community group helped to organize a coalition of principals, and they began to, for the first time, do things together. After about 4 years, they recognized that they could not, as a principal said to me, I used to think I could do education in my classroom if I could get the school just right and the teachers trained, but after 4 years I realized I can't do it alone. So the principals now, the high school network, have created and set up a development council to really work on economic development in the neighborhood, to bring in other neighborhood resources to do other neighborhood work. So the schools have created a neighborhood organization to continue work that needs to be done in order to really get kids educated. They're interested in setting up student businesses on neighborhood business strips, for example, and really make the schools part of community life once again.
So one of the important things to recognize about this little revolution that's happened in Chicago schools is that these local school councils that Ann described are elected. So we have elections for 6,000 new public officials in Chicago. Overnight, when Chicago school reform happened, the number of local elected officials who are African American and Latino doubled in the United States, right? Because we've got all kinds of folks. In fact, in that first election, over 20,000 people ran for local office. So it became a kind of seedbed of democracy and a seedbed of citizen participation. The school reform movement in Chicago is not a uniform success. In fact, what we have now is 552 separate stories, right? Stories that are all unique because each school, in fact, is defining itself and its own direction. These school councils are taking off in all kinds of unpredictable ways. But one of the things we're most interested in, and we're seeing it in hundreds of schools in Chicago now, is the way in which this relationship between the community and the school, the idea that a healthy community and a successful school are interrelated, are intertwined, that they're absolutely part of the same agenda. This is beginning to emerge all over the place. We're even beginning now to see some educational kinds of payoffs. It takes a while for this stuff to begin to show up and so on in things like test scores. But I think we've got here in a Chicago Tribune article of about a year ago, a headline which we were really proud of when it came on. It's a long way to go still, but the city school test scores are on their way up. Not across the board, not in every school, but one of the interesting things about school reform is that the successful schools cut across the kinds of communities. That is, you'll find them in the poorest communities as well as more middle class and affluent communities. You'll find them in all kinds of racial and ethnic enclaves in the city of Chicago. So it's a very interesting process, and we are continuously learning from that process. Now, we were talking with our colleagues here in the audience, again, about their own experience with institutions in their communities and how it is that when you were thinking about institutions in your communities, you thought about this question of control. And we were asking about whether or not you had some examples of institutions in your community that had this control problem, that were in fact answerable to someplace not in the community. V, you were talking about.
Yes, I had one. I was talking about the parks and how they try to control the community in terms of the parks. They open up for the citizens, but at the same time, in the summertime, they close at 6 o'clock. And you tell me that teenagers are the ones who would need the parks open at 6 o'clock so that they will have the opportunity to go and it would give them something else to do.
Yeah, clearly somebody at the top of the park district downtown in city government thinks that it's a good idea for parks to close exactly when kids could use them, right? This is not the kind of a decision you would expect a community to make. Ramona, we had one other example I know that Roberta wanted to tell us about an institution that you've had something to do with that is clearly not controlled by community folks. You want to just...
Right. In southeastern Virginia, my apartment complex was run by the local housing authority, and I participated on the tenant association there. Like most tenant associations, they want to run the business of the apartment complex. They want to become independent of the housing authority. But because of finances, money, purse strings, proposals, whatever, what have you, the housing authority has the thumb on the association.
Yes. So clearly there were conflicts, right?
Yes.
There were different kinds of paths that the local association and the downtown institution wanted to happen. But what I think we're talking about here is, in fact, recognizing how these two tools differ and then understanding how the institutional tool can be captured for local community building processes by local citizens. And that's what we're seeing happen all over the place. What's absolutely fascinating about that process is that when local citizens begin looking at institutions, they see things that sometimes the professionals working in those institutions haven't seen. They view those institutions differently. We're learning that in Chicago about the schools, and now we're beginning to learn it across the country about a lot of other institutions. And John, I wonder whether you could talk about what local citizens see in these things when they begin to have some control and authority over them. Right?
And I think that's the way to put it. You can begin to see something in local institutions that you never saw when you are on top of them and you're able to look down, you know what you see. We learned this in the Dudley Street neighborhood in Boston. You begin to see that these local institutions, instead of controlling you, are in fact treasure chests. They sort of look like this. Here's a school, and this school can open up, if it's controlled by local citizens, and become a treasure chest in the community. So as we've traveled across the country and listened to local community people about when our local institutions serving them rather than controlling them, right? We have seen that when citizens gain control of local institutions, they begin to empty out the treasures of the hospital, of the community college, of the school, of the park, and make those available for community development. Now, as we've looked at schools, for instance, that have opened up the community, we have seen all kinds of treasures. And if you look at page 171 and 172 in the textbook, you'll see a list of the assets that exist in schools, the treasures we found communities using. They start with the facilities, where local communities have taken over the school when the school is closed, and the meeting place for the community is the school. Then next, the local school opens up its access to its special equipment and materials so that the local small businessmen come into the school and use the computers in the evening to do their balance sheets. The school becomes an economic development resource. Next, we see schools shifting where they purchase things. They don't purchase their school supplies 300 miles away. They purchase them in the neighborhood. They are supporting a neighborhood economy. They are a real treasure in that sense. Then the next is the employment practices of the school. It is a jobs center in its own employment practices, and some schools are really focusing on the hiring of people from the neighborhood. Another treasure in many schools is the fact that they are a place that can organize courses. And here we mean especially courses that the adults in the community as citizens give. Remember we were saying you can inventory the educational possibilities in the community. You can run a better school after school than they can run in the school if you mobilize all the knowing that people in the community have. Then you have teachers, right? Very skilled, special, knowledgeable people who just usually you don't see in community development activities. We need them outside those classrooms, and we need them leading the kids outside those classrooms too, and that's the last resource here. Well, I guess the financial capacity, schools can also be an important vehicle for receiving money, right? And finally then, they also are the place where we have stored our young people who need to be led by their teachers out into community development activities. And the book gives all kinds of examples of all kinds of schools across the United States that have been doing that. Now, one school in Chicago that is a good example is the Lucy Flower Vocational High School. And let's talk to the principal about what they have done as they have opened themselves to community.
In a time when there are not enough jobs for students, we'd like for them to be able to create jobs for themselves and others so that we would like to see them build those skills necessary. We started back in 1990, and at that time we were interested in starting one business, and the Scholastic Shop was that business. We formed a network. Bethel, New Life called together 3 high schools, several businesses, several community organizations, and we formed a partnership. It was an opportunity for our students to be mentored and taught by not just in-house staff, but by community people. I can remember when we first started, the students felt this is something that I cannot do, but now they know I can do this. I can build skills. And if I choose, I can own and operate my own business, and that's what this is all about. Well, our whole focus is entrepreneurship. We feel that our students should get real hands-on experiences while they are in school, and so we have 6 student-run businesses here. Credit Teens, Scholastic Shop, Flower Pot Cafe are 3 of those. We also have a boutique, Flower in Action, which is our built environment cluster, and we have Megabytes, printing and copying service.
Basically, the store is to teach you hands-on training for corporate America. So when you get out into the real world, you'll know what you're doing and what steps you need to do it from. Through the basic training that we had, I'm planning on being an accountant, and by me handling money and doing paperwork on money, it's showing me more of what I need to know when I become an accountant.
We have community members that come in. They eat in the Flower Pot Cafe. They purchase papers from the Scholastic shop.